I see we have some people from Texas, California, New Hampshire. It's so great to have you all with us. Welcome, everyone. In this webinar, we will be covering common questions that you might have about child rights. In particular, what are child rights and why do they matter to UNICEF, to the world, and to children and young people everywhere? As USA volunteers and as global citizens, your voice and your actions play an important role in promoting and protecting the rights of every child everywhere. That includes your ongoing work in support of UNICEF's life-saving work around the world, as well as increasing opportunities to work with UNICEF USA to improve the lives of children right here in the United States. During this session, we aim to give you a shared understanding and language on child rights and to offer you tools and skills to put child rights into action as UNICEF USA volunteers and as leaders in your own communities. This webinar and future webinars that the National Youth Council will be offering are co-created with the support of UNICEF USA staff who have expertise in this content. As youth leaders, we have been given the opportunity to adapt these materials to make them more relatable to younger audiences, and we hope to hear more from you about your experiences participating in these webinars so we can continue to improve them in the future. And the next slide is is a rundown of what we will be covering today. So if you want to take a quick look at that. And then before we get started, I'd like to go through some ways you can participate while maintaining a safe and inclusive environment for staff and supporters. Here at UNICEF USA, we prioritize child safeguarding, which means the protection of the identities and information of all children under 18 that we work with and volunteer for us. For that reason, we have disabled the cameras and audio for all participants and the function that allows participants to chat with one another. As you join webinars, we want to remind you as well to guard your privacy in what you share and to follow our community guidelines. Please also keep in mind our community agreements, which include we have zero tolerance for bullying, vulgar or discriminatory language, including on the chat. UNICEF USA staff will flag and remove participants who use inappropriate language or display inappropriate names. Please keep in mind that what is shared in the chat by non-UNICEF USA staff members does not reflect the opinions or beliefs of the organization. That said, we want to make this webinar as participatory as possible so we can benefit from everyone's perspectives and voices. Therefore, we encourage you to send your comments to the host via the chat function throughout the webinar. We ask that you please submit questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and the facilitators will answer them throughout and at the end of their presentation. And so if any questions are raised outside of our knowledge, there are UNICEF USA staff participating who will jump in to support. And with that, I'd like to hand over the floor to Salma to lead us in a discussion on human rights.
Thank you so much, Dia. So what are human rights? What comes to mind when you think about human rights? I really want you guys to dig deep, think about it, and put your thoughts in the chat. I'll wait a moment. Yeah, so you can think broadly, you can just really whatever comes to mind when you think of human rights, something you learn maybe in your history class, sort of what you believe it means. Every single answer is valid. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for sharing your thoughts. I'll read over some of the comments and you guys can still add some more if you guys would like. So someone said basic things that all humans need to survive, having the right to be who you want to be and to be heard, universal rights that every individual is granted when they're born. So some of the themes that, really see is it's a basic thing. Every human deserves it. Everyone needs it. I think that's one of the key words there. It's a need. And every individual is granted when they're born. So it's a universal thing. And this really digs into what we'll be talking about later on, but having the right to be who you want, to be heard, existing without sort of confines. So these are all valid and great ideas. And now let's really get into the formal definition. And all of you guys are really on the right track for it. Human rights are a global minimum standard that recognizes and protects the dignity of all human beings. So as someone said, like a basic human right, this is a minimum thing. I really want to highlight that. They govern how individuals live in society and with each other, as well as relationships with governments and obligations that governments have toward them. So there's one thing on the individual side and something also on the governmental side. So rights are expressed and guaranteed by treaties, customary international law, and other types of law, from the rights of women and children to persons with disabilities and minorities and indigenous people. The creation of a body of international human rights is one of the United Nations' greatest achievements, which UNICEF is sort of a part of. Together, these treaties and declarations have helped create a culture of human rights throughout the world, providing a powerful tool to protect and promote all rights. So, giving people, like, this is sort of the list humans have, these are humans' rights, and, utilizing that tool to make sure that everyone is able to advocate for themselves. Everyone is able to take up space because it is their right. Rights are universal, inalienable, indivisible, and interdependent. And, before I get into these terms, I really want to know, what do they mean to you? What do these terms mean to you? You can share them in the chat like last time, and really think, what does it mean? And every answer you have, it's valid. Yes, everyone, a lot of people are bringing up universal and how it really offers people, like every single human being, it relates to everyone and applies to everyone. Someone said that in the chat. It's open to everyone, regardless of race, religion, gender, regardless of what they identify or who they are. And it offers the opportunity to think critically, to experience life for others, to experience life as equally as the other person. So that equality aspect. Universal, all human beings are born with them. Everyone and everywhere has the same rights as a result of our common humanity. We are all equal and entitled to our human rights without discrimination. That's sort of the way UNICEF thinks about it. Someone said in the chat, inalienable means it can't be taken away from you. And yeah, it doesn't matter what you've done, where you're from, what borders you are within. No one can voluntarily give them up, nor can anyone or anything take them away from you. Indivisible, so whether civil, political, economic, social, or culture in nature, they are all inherent to the dignity of every human person. Consequently, they all have status as rights. There's no such thing as a small right, or there's no hierarchy of human rights, and they're all equally important. You can't really cherry pick them. You can't be like, we'll respect your right to not face discrimination, but not respect your right to live, have access to these basic needs, right? We want you to be able to exist, to survive, but we're not going to give you access to an education. So interdependent fulfillment of one right often depends on the fulfillment of another. For instance, the realization of the right to health may depend on the realization of a right to education or the right to information. You can't make good decisions about your health if you don't have access to all the information. So now I'll hand it over to Sweet to facilitate a role play about the difference between rights and needs, because that's a really important thing.
Thank you so much, Selma. Now that we just talked about rights, now we're going to talk about another common term, need, and examine the difference. Dia, would you like to join me for a role play exercise?
Of course.
All right. So in this case, you will be acting as the child and I'll be acting as the adult. Okay, scenario number one. Dia, I have a question for you. Are you thirsty? Would you like a glass of water?
Yes, please. I'm very thirsty.
All right, here's a glass of water. Selma, when you look at our interaction, who do you think has the power in this relationship?
I think you do, sweet. You're the one with the water. You're the one that can give Dia the water. And like Dia is the one that needs the water, right? She is the one that it's one of her basic needs. And you're the one with all the power in that situation.
That's very true. Dia, how do you feel about the situation?
I feel that you were kind in responding to my needs, but I was not an empowered actor in the conversation.
Yep, very valid. So in this situation, Dia is not aware of her rights, and I'm also not aware of the rights that she has, which means I basically have the advantage. I am the power. All right, so scenario number two, it's a brand new day. Although Dia, you're very thirsty, I have decided to drink that glass of water. I'm not that mean, but in this situation, let's just assume that I am that type of person. Dia, can you please ask me for a glass of water again?
Of course. Can I have a glass of water?
Sorry, I have decided to drink my glass of water. Selma, what are the dynamics here? What do you see here?
This isn't a sustainable thing. There's an imbalance of power. You have all the power and Dia has none. You're able to drink the water. You're able to do whatever you want with the water. And it's not equitable, right? Mm-hmm. And Dia is the one suffering at the end of it.
Yep, thank you for explaining that. So this is the same situation as the first scenario where I still have the power over this children's rights. All right, so let's play this out a third time with the rights-based approach. And I want you all to embed that in your brain. This is a rights-based approach now. So now this time, our volunteer, which is me in this situation, understands child rights and has been given guidance on how to advocate for his or her rights, maybe thanks to Unicef. The person with water is also informed about rights, their obligation to help fulfill them, and has greater capacity to do so. So in summary, Dia knows her rights, and now I know my rights and how I have to respect Dia's rights as well. So Dia, can you please ask me for a glass of water again? But now you know that you have the rights to attain water.
I have the rights to attain water. Can I have a glass of water?
Of course, here you go. So if this is a real life situation, not only will I give a child a glass of water, but I will commit to take the time to understand, to consult with children and young people to really understand root causes preventing, in this situation, Dia from realizing her rights to clean and accessible water. I have committed to address underlying inequities, an example why it is that some kids get water and some don't. And I will work with children and young people to identify solutions and in turn invest the resources necessary to make systemic changes to protect that right. So Selma, what are the dynamics here and what differences does the rights approach here have on children overall?
I think right away, what I can really see is that you now understand what rights Dia has, and you're able to help fulfill that. And it's not as if you're giving out charity, like I'm doing this and aren't I so nice for doing it? So there's that change on your end. And then on Dia's end, she has the necessary resources to advocate for herself. She's entitled and has the agency to ask because she has a right to water. So the changes on both sides.
Yeah, so here I have moved from just immediate needs to long-term solution while addressing inequities. So I know that Dia has the rights to clean and accessible water, and she knows this as well. We want to empower children to stand up for what is theirs. And this is what UNICEF thrives to do, is to educate everyone, both children and adults, on the importance and differences of both needs and rights. Next slide, please. Oh, if you can go back, that would be great. Thank you so much. So here, rights are needs, though rights are stronger than needs. Needs can be specific to circumstances, but rights don't change. And I want you all to remember that rights do not change. So in terms of relationships, for the person in need, We are shifting from powerless at the mercy of people's whims to empowered. The volunteer has the right to a glass of water, and it's not just that I feel kind and generous. So we move away from the notion, wouldn't it be nice if everyone had access to clean water, good health, safety, which essentially, if someone feels like giving it someday. In doing so, we are shifting from a charity approach, randomly touching some but not others, like a lottery, to one of accountability, to make this a reality for every child. When we shift from needs to rights, we are educating and advocating for a universal right that is applicable to everyone, regardless of their differences. And now I'll hand it over to Dia to talk about what we call the Arch of Human Rights.
Thank you so much, Sui, for that great explanation. Now that we understand a bit more about rights versus needs, what is UNICEF's approach to promoting rights? Now, remember, rights are about relationships, how we live with each other, and the relationship between individuals with their governments and the obligations governments have towards them. We can visualize this relationship through the metaphor of an arch, which is the strongest architectural creation. And on one side of the arch, we have the duty bearer and the other a rights holder. Together, they create a strong bond that helps to uplift the rights and dignity of all people. It is important to remember that one person's arch does not and should not compromise another person's or group's arch. Those with an obligation to respect, promote, and realize children's rights are called duty bearers. The state is the main duty bearer, including everyone who works for the state, like police officers, lawyers, teachers, and social workers. Individuals and groups who benefit from human rights treaties are called rights holders. For child rights, the main rights holders are children, which are individuals under 18. However, parents are also rights holders under the convention. They are entitled to assistance from the state in raising their children, and they are entitled to provide their child with advice and guidance. In politics, it's important to also understand this balance of power. Government has responsibility just as you have a right and responsibility to participate through your voting power and your voice. Without one side, the other falls down. Bringing these two sides together creates a much stronger framework than just looking at needs and well-being. Accountability is key here once again. UNICEF's role is to build the capacity of duty bearers on one side to understand and deliver upon their responsibilities, and on the other side, rights holders to be empowered to understand and advocate for their rights and to be listened to by duty bearers. And think of the third scenario of our role play earlier. And then our UNICEF's Child-Friendly Cities initiative is a great example of that. Municipal and city governments formally commit to applying the child rights framework to their local governance and working towards UNICEF recognition, while also agreeing to work alongside the community, children, parents, other stakeholders to put child rights into practice. And with that, I'll hand it over to Salma, who will go over a drawing a child exercise with us.
Thank you so much, Dia. So we're going to move this discussion from a theoretical one to a more personal one, so focused on the individual child. You'll all need a piece of paper and a writing instrument. And I want you to write a child on the front of your paper. It can be yourself, it can be someone you know, it can be something you just came up with, and you can just draw an outline, even if it's a stick figure, you know. I'll give you guys like about 30 seconds to a minute to really write that. Awesome. Well, I'll let you guys finish up. I just really want to get to, so like when we're talking about children, I want to highlight that we're talking about anyone under the age of 18. So I'm considered a child for the next 9 days, right? So maybe some of you drew a baby, a teenager. I'm assuming we have a mixture of girls, boys, maybe some non-binary folks. And so what we consider children is anyone under the age of 18, and anyone, regardless of their situation, will always be considered a child, even if they're mature, even if, you know, they don't seem like a child. You know, that's some interesting phrasing. But yeah, so Sui, would you like to introduce your child to the group?
Of course. So I drew here a little stick figure. It's a boy. Let's say he's about 10 years old and loves to play soccer.
Awesome. So if human rights are basic needs, then what does this child, or you, if that's who you're focusing on, need in order to grow up and be the best version that they can be? I would like all of you to write your answers on the back of the paper. So I'll give you guys some time to really look. What does that child need in order to grow up and be the best version of themselves? Maybe that child has asthma. They might need an inhaler in order to survive, right? So really think deep. Awesome. So Dia, could you share what you wrote?
Of course. So I basically drew a young girl who is about 10 years old and wrote about how she needs access to safe shelter, water, and food, as well as the ability to actively engage in hobbies and play as a young child.
Awesome. See, you know, that child really needs to be a young person, you know, have access to these things. Those are really important rights. So if we all have human rights and we all have the same rights, then why do we talk about children? Why does UNICEF focus on children? Humans under 18, like the ones you drew, why do they need special rights? You know, example, we can't speak out, we can't vote. So please share your thoughts in the chat. Like, why do child rights exist? Awesome. Yeah. So children are reliant on adults for certain things. Yeah. Awesome. So someone said in the chat that children need to be protected more than adults do. And I think that's a really important thing. And that's one of those things. You know, children are in a special stage of development. And so they need special rights and special protection. And someone else said to help children develop properly, to instill confidence, to provide a voice for a group that often does not have a power dynamic in their favor. I think if you look back at some of Sui and Dia's role playing, we could see that, you know, the child didn't have that confidence initially, didn't have the, you know, capacity to advocate for themselves because they didn't know their rights. And there was a power imbalance. Someone else said to protect the child because every child has needs, right? So children are reliant on adults for certain things, and that's just how it is. And that is why we need to have these special rights and special protections. Children have the right to play, adults do not. Adults have the right to vote, etc. You know, so children have special rights, and adults also have rights that they have over children or that children don't have. Children are unique and deserve the best chance to develop into the best human being they can be. Children have the right to thrive. By definition, child rights are another global minimum standards that ensures the protection, survival, development of all persons below the age of 18 without discrimination. So now I'll turn the floor over to Sweet to guide us in examining specific child rights.
Thank you so much, Selma. So now let's look into more detail on what exactly these child rights are. Krista, if you can please put the link in the chat, that would be great. Yes, so please open that link and take a look at that. I want everyone to take a moment and pick one article, reflect on what it means to you. I'll give you about 30 seconds. If you would like to share, you can definitely share in the chat. All right, great. Just for clarification, we use the term article to describe individual rights, just for clarification. Okay, great. Protection from violence. 13. All right, thank you so much. So Selma, if you don't mind, can you please tell me what you chose and why?
Yeah, I chose Article 2, which is no discrimination. All children have all these rights, no matter who they are, where they live, what languages they speak, their religion, what they think. So regardless, no child should be treated unfairly for any reason.
Thank you so much. Okay, so recalling our discussion regarding rights being indivisible and interconnected, keep in mind that the CRC is not a shopping list of rights. There's no hierarchy. So if you look at the links between the rights, I want you all to ask yourself, are there any links between, for example, 2 and 11? What would happen to one right if the others was not fulfilled? For example, Article 2 states no discrimination, and Article 11 states protection from kidnapping. At face value, it may seem as that these two articles do not correlate with one another. Some of us might be thinking, what does no discrimination have to do with protection from kidnapping? However, if you really think this through, you can see a relationship between the two. For instance, Article 2 is advocating for no discrimination, and 11 is advocating for protection from kidnapping. This means children, regardless of their socioeconomic status, gender, or race, should all be protected from kidnapping. So now we can see the relations between the articles. It starts to show the indivisibility and interdependence of a person's rights. Next slide, please. There's one right we want to highlight here, Article 12, which is respect for children's views, the right to participate, the right for children and young people to give their opinions freely on issues that affect them. Adults should listen and take children seriously. I want you all to think of a time when you had the opportunity to participate in a decision-making process that impacted you. Think to yourself, what did it look like, feel like? I'll give you about 15 to 30 seconds. All right, Selma, I'll ask you another question again. Would you please share with me your experience with this?
Yeah, I can talk about my experience of being on the National Youth Council. Unicef works with children as someone who's considered a child, it's really important that our voices are heard, that we don't just have a seat at the table, but that our voices are being uplifted. And I think that's something that's really important because in an institution where we're advocating for child rights, you can't make decisions about young people without our input. It's removing our power in these scenarios. And that's why I really enjoy the ability of being on the National Youth Council, because I can say my opinions and have my opinions be heard.
Yeah, very valid, very true. That is one thing that we really want to highlight, is to really understand the rights that children have. So another question that I wanted to ask all of you is, what difference can it make when children and young people are able to meaningfully participate in decisions that impact them? When you all to think to yourself. So the question is, what difference can it make when children and young people are able to meaningfully participate in decisions that impact them? If you would like to share in the chat, please feel free to do so. All right, so now Dia, I'll ask you your opinion on this. What do you think of this question?
Just to add on to what Selma had mentioned, I think it empowers them to have the ability to speak out on the things that impact them and the issues that matter to them, and the opportunity to be heard on important topics that really do affect them.
Thank you. Oh, here we have a response. When children can participate, they feel empowered and confident. Very true. Yeah. So day in, day out, in high income and low income countries alike, UNICEF strives to take action for and through child rights, which includes ensuring that the voices, needs, and priorities of children are taken into account, whether it be building a latrine in a refugee camp, asking young people what places are safe, or working with cities through the Child Friendly Cities initiative to ensure local decision makers take seriously the views of children and young people in how their cities is developed. We know when you engage children, you make better decisions. And so to leave you off with some questions, if you can please go back, that would be great. These 3 questions are what I want all of you to think of when you are participating. And now I will be handing it off to Dia to talk about the CRC.
Thank you, Sui. So some of you may be wondering what the CRC is. Some of you may already have a background on what it is, but the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child is a result of world leaders coming together and deciding that children needed a special convention made just for them because people under 18 years old often need special care and protection that adults do not, as we had mentioned earlier. The CRC was adopted in 1989 after 10 years of intense negotiation from leaders around the world. And the CRC is made up of a list of agreements called articles, which we had just looked at, made by almost all countries in the world that outlines the specific rights that children and young people can claim. The convention reflects a revolutionary new vision of the child. Children are neither the property of their parents, neither are they the helpless objects of charity. They are human beings with rights and responsibilities appropriate to their age and stage of development. They are also social actors capable of making a positive difference in their lives, their communities, and the world. So the CRC is often described as the best human rights treaty in the world, and some of you may be wondering what's so special about it. And well, there are a few reasons, including how of the 9 core international human rights treaties, it is the only one focused on children. It is the first legally binding international instrument to properly incorporate the full range of human rights: civil, cultural, economic, political, and social rights. It is also the most comprehensive. This includes the right to survival, to develop to the fullest, to protection from violence, and to participate fully in family, cultural, and social life. It is the first human rights treaty that grants a role in its implementation to a specialized United Nations agency, UNICEF. UNICEF helped draft the convention and is named in the document as a source of expertise. It is the most widely ratified treaty as well. 196 UN member states have ratified the CRC, meaning these national governments commit to protecting child rights in their countries. These commitments apply to governments, the police, court judges, teachers, parents, and every adult nearly all around the world. Only 1 member state has not ratified the treaty. Sui, do you know which one? And I have a quick hint. It might be a very surprising answer.
I think it's the United States.
Yes. The US was very involved in the drafting of the treaty and signed the convention in 1995, but has not yet ratified it. The fact is, the United States has not ratified several human rights treaties, including the CRC, for a variety of reasons, such as questions regarding the state versus federal responsibilities for children. Some of you may be wondering, does that mean that the convention does not apply in the US? Well, regardless of whether we ratified the CRC, it offers us a framework to ensure that all of our decisions, behaviors, and programs are in the best interests of every child without discrimination. UNICEF USA relies on this framework in all its programming and has committed itself to equip children and young people and adult allies with the tools, awareness, and support to put child rights into practice, promoting child-friendly policies, practices, and programs at every level of government. We will share a background document in the chat for those interested in learning more about the status of the CRC's ratification in the United States. And with that, I'll hand it over to Salma to talk about the child rights approach.
Thank you so much, Dia. So now that we've examine the child rights leaders around the world have agreed upon to uphold, let's get into accountability, because we can make these decisions. Adults can make it, leaders can make these decisions, but we really need to get into its practice. Next slide. Child rights are so much more than an international treaty. It's a roadmap for every decision we make with and for children. So all the child rights articles in the CRC can be broken down into 5 overarching rights shown at the bottom of the slide. So no discrimination, best interests of the child, making rights real, family guidance as children develop, life survival and development, and respect for children's views. Those are the 6, I should say, main portions. So we can all put child rights into practice by asking the following questions tied to each of these rights when considering any decision or action that affects children and young people. First, are we asking children and young people their views? Are we considering their physical, emotional, social well-being? Are the best interests of the child a top priority? Are we ensuring children are being treated with care and respect in all circumstances? Is every child and young person being treated fairly and protected from discrimination? How is it being implemented? Where are the resources? Is it sustainable? So next slide. So do you ever find yourself in situations where you're asking yourself these questions, or where you should be asking yourself these questions, or where the decision makers should be asking these questions? Have you ever asked decision makers these questions? Is it something they bring into their work, into their job before they make decisions regarding children or with children? And if you have, what was the result? What kind of difference could we make as advocates if we ask these kinds of questions on a regular basis around decisions impacting children and young people in your community? Really reflect, if these questions were things that we talked about, how different would the world look? Especially in things like education, for club members, how do you think that would work within your school system? As UNICEF USA club members and advocates, we are a part of a global network of young leaders speaking out and taking action for child rights. From efforts to bridge the digital divide in education, to fighting climate change, to championing LGBTQI+ rights and social justice, remember, your voice matters. And you are not alone. I think so much of the time, we might feel alone in this fight, but every single one of us is working to fight for these rights. So in the flyer are climate change activists with UNICEF. You can see Greta Thunberg. And the other thing is a flyer for the Child-Friendly Cities Initiative Intergenerational Action Planning in the city of Houston. So we encourage you to take a look at any issue you're passionate about in your community through a child rights approach. In our follow-up email, which we'll send after this webinar, we'll share with you a document that outlines these questions in more details. And you can use it as a tool for research and advocacy. Because so many of the times, the issues we're really passionate about, whether it be educational equity or climate change, UNICEF has, you have the opportunity within UNICEF to advocate for these issues. And a helpful way to remember the child rights approach is to think of the metaphor of a table with a child on top. Imagine each question is one of the legs of a chair or the ground underneath. So if say a leg of the table is missing, that is an answer to any of these questions. So if it's a no, we're not taking children's opinions into consideration. That leg is gone. And then thus the table becomes unstable and the child could fall down and be harmed. And in the world, that's sort of how child rights exist and how these questions come to be. So we also go back to the human rights arch we talked about earlier. To apply a child rights approach, we also need to use every opportunity to raise awareness that child rights among both children and young people and decision makers who have a responsibility to ensure that every child can grow up healthy, educated, protected, and respected. And now we'll go back to a discussion with Sui.
All right. Dia, if you don't mind, can you please go back to the child that you drew? And I encourage all of you at home to do so. You will need that drawing for our discussion. Okay, so from the last exercise, looking at child rights, do you notice if any of the needs that you identify on the back of your sheet match particular with child rights?
Yeah, I do. In fact, I see that both Article 27, which is the right to food, clothing, and a safe home, as well as Article 31, which is the right to rest, play, culture, and the arts, both match with the child rights I pictured when drawing my child.
Great, thank you for sharing. We are sharing the link to the CRC articles for all of you to cross-reference the needs you wrote with specific child rights. But the question that I want to ask all of you at home and here with us, what didn't match or what rights are missing? Some of you, as you are looking around, you might have noticed that you might have an answer of none, because most likely every need is reflected in one way or another in the CRC as a right, because it's so comprehensive. So a question that I want to ask is, how is the CRC important in making sure that this child can get everything they need to survive and thrive? That is a question that I would like for all of you to take into consideration. Next slide, please. So with any good webinar at Unicef USA, we always want to make sure we translate awareness to action. So we'll close with a few calls to action. Number one, learning about child rights is a journey. A good first place to start in learning more is with Unicef Global CRC page, which will also be shared at the chat.
To add on, number two, educate your community on child rights with Unicef USA's Child Rights 101 PowerPoint, which will be linked in the chat as well. Number three, start applying a child rights approach to your activities and to your advocacy. UNICEF's child rights-based approach guiding questions can serve as a guide to evaluate any policy, practice, or issue from a child rights perspective.
Yeah, learn more about UNICEF's Child Friendly Cities Initiative and how UNICEF USA is working with local governments and other stakeholders, including children and young people, to put child rights into practice at the local level. More information is available in the link that will be put in the chat. Regardless whether your city is currently engaged in the Child Friendly Cities Initiative, you can join us in urging your mayor to put children first in policies and decisions through our Phone to Action advocacy platform, which will be linked in the chat, or by texting CFCI to 52886 on your phone.
Great. So to summarize, if you can go back, that would be great. To summarize what we just said, here are the lists that you personally can do. You can learn more about children's rights, educate your community on child rights with USA's Child Rights 101 PowerPoint, start applying a child rights approach to your activities and to your advocacy, learn more about the Child Friendly Cities Initiative, and of course, like Salma said, urge your mayor to put children first in policies. And as we mentioned, we will also be emailing all of the links along with the survey after this webinar. And lastly, I want all of you to think to yourself, what are some steps you can take in the next week, month, or year to promote child rights in your own lives? If you would like to share in the chat, please feel free to do so. I will give you guys about 10 to 20 seconds. Great. Tell a child that they are loved. Creating a community club, hosting community webinars, meetings to inform others of child rights. Make comfort kits for them. Go with necessary supplies. Yep, all of these in the chat are great ways to exactly promote child rights in your own communities as well. And now on to Dia.
Thank you, Sui, for that thought-provoking topic and question. And with that, we will be moving on to our Q&A part of this webinar. Danielle Goldberg from the UNICEF USA staff is here with us. So if you have any last questions, please send them to the host and we will do our best to answer them. So far, we have none. But we can, so another thing is please put them in the Q&A section, not just the chat, so that we can all see them. I'll give you guys a few seconds. Oh, we have one question. How can we get more involved in UNICEF and child rights? Danielle, go ahead.
Sure, I can jump in. Well, first, I do want to say the point of educating you all around child rights is to see how everything you're already doing with UNICEF USA is serving child rights, because that is our universal mandate. But I also want to let you know that everything we laid out are all things we want to encourage you to do. And increasingly, you'll see more and more resources and materials and opportunities to the UNICEF Unite Club experience that are going to be directly addressing the needs of and opportunities to promote child rights globally and domestically. So this is going to be an evolution, and this webinar is the first important step, working with our youth leaders to start equipping you with the information around child rights. So it's a great question. Thank you for asking it.
So Sienna has another question. Can we come to New York and meet UNICEF to help us grow as well? So we have a yearly UNICEF Unite summit that happens, and hopefully we'll be able to have one in person sometime. But for now, we would love for all of you to join your local club. You can also see that on the UNICEF Club's website, whether you want to join one, and you can get involved with them. And I believe Salma has some other remarks about that question. You can go ahead.
Yeah, 100%. Like the best way for you or for anyone really in your community to get involved with UNICEF is by joining a local UNICEF club or starting one at your high school. That's how most of us started out within UNICEF. I joined my high school's UNICEF club my freshman year, and that's sort of how I learned more about UNICEF and more about advocating for child rights and building that community. And I think it starts with you as an individual. Once you sort of understand child rights and UNICEF's work, you're able to teach that to the next group of people. You can teach that to your friends, and your friends will teach it to their friends and their family. And sort of that's how you can really grow the base of people who understand UNICEF's work and child rights.
So Danielle, did you have another question, or is your hand just raised from the last one? Oh, okay.
That was from the last one.
Sounds good. We have another question. Can we volunteer at UNICEF to help children? Just to add on to Salma's last answer, get involved at any local club or start one. For example, I started one at my local high school, and you have so many resources on the UNICEF Club's website to help you get started. And you can also communicate with UNICEF USA and like our team at UNICEF Clubs, as well as email the National Youth Council email if you have any questions about that. And yeah, so I would say getting involved with your local clubs is the best way you can volunteer to help out children. Okay, we have another question. Are there any specific child rights that relate to current events or disparities around the world? Does anyone want to take that? Danielle?
I think every situation around the world right now, we can tie it to child rights. If we look at the war in Ukraine right now, we have children who are fleeing their homes. They don't have access to clean water. They're losing their access to education, to security. Families are being separated. There's everything that you see in the news. All of those are tied to child rights situations. And UNICEF is on the ground working with local partners across the borders and everywhere where the children are going. That's just one example. You can look at the issue around any children who are on the move, migrant, refugee children, and ensuring wherever they are, they still have access to all those rights you saw. So those are just some examples. And I encourage you, the more you look at child rights and you see how they relate to the right to play, the right to privacy, all these things are in the news. They're just not often framed as issues directly impacting children. And so now we encourage you, when you look at anything going on, even it could be general economic policy where people are struggling to be able to pay their bills, their rent. Those are things also impacting children. So let's ask, how do these issues impact children disproportionately, especially those children of color, children low income, children who are on the move, and push policies to make sure that those questions are being addressed.
Thank you for that great answer, Danielle. Looks like we don't have any other questions, but I can give maybe a couple minutes for anyone to type in any last questions they have.
Yeah, and I also do want to bring up, some of our last question that Danielle answered. All these rights are really connected. That's sort of one of the bigger things we talked about in our discussion. And so if there's no protection from violence, protection in war, that child can't go to school, that child can't get educated. And so they're all fundamentally connected. And so if a child doesn't have one right, they're unable to have numerous rights. A child's access to, like basic survival, that is an essential piece for them to even get educated, for them to be able to play. So just like thinking back to that, like every single child requires access to these things. So keeping families together, that's something that's really important. That's something that's been happening at the border. A child can't really thrive if they don't have their parents or their family with them.
Thank you for that great answer, Selma. We have another question coming in by Shelley. What are UNICEF Blue Dot centers? Does anyone want to take that one? Go ahead, Danielle.
Okay. So as I understand it, those are centers when children, especially in the case of Ukrainian children on the move, where those are safe spaces for children and families to be kids, where they're provided support from UNICEF child protection specialists, people who can provide social, emotional support and needs. Because when you're on, children everywhere, even in the most dire circumstances, need to be children. And even if it's just a few moments of respite for the parents and for the children to just be themselves, UNICEF prioritizes that at every spot along the routes.
Last call for any last questions. Okay, well, it looks like we don't have any other questions. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and everything you do for the world's children every day. We appreciate your feedback on this webinar to help us continually improve. In the chat, we are sharing a short SurveyMonkey survey sent by Krista. We'll also share it in our email follow-up along with the links to all the resources we reference. Have a great night, everyone. Thank you for coming. Bye.
Thank you. Good night. Bye. Wow.
Great job, guys.
Oh my goodness.
Amazing.
That was incredible. It's like you were born to do this. I am so impressed and proud and inspired. I was beaming the whole time.
You guys were great.
Yeah. I feel like this is the new, you set the new benchmark of what this training should look like. And then we're going to take this and all of us staff are going to look at your webinar to determine how we train everyone in the UNICEF USA staff first and then everyone else. It was fantastic. Does anyone want to share any reflections before we call it a night? Should we stop recording?
Yeah.